generation of space explorers here. So thanks for bringing them here to give them a chance to take a look at what goes on in the space program and maybe what some of the possibilities could be for them in the future. You never know when you bring a student to an educational venue like this that they might see something that could change the rest of their lives. So thanks for providing the opportunity for that to happen with these folks. I'd like to start now with this particular slide here. That view was last seen by a human being in 1972. It's a view that I had always hoped to see, but I never did. Flying in the space shuttle, we fly 200 to 300 miles in orbit, not the thousands of miles that you have to be able to get this view. When I look backwards over my growing up, I was 7 years old when I watched Alan Shepard become the first American astronaut. And I remember watching it on a black and white television. Anybody know what a black and white television is? I was in high school when Neil and Buzz walked on the moon for the first time. So I consider myself to be a product of the moon generation, because I was watching that happening as I was growing up. When I look at the young students here now, I see the Mars generation. Because in their lifetime, they'll see somebody walk on Mars. And we're building the hardware that they'll use right now. The Orion spacecraft is the vehicle that they'll launch and land in, the crew will. The rocket itself is called the Space Launch System, and that's a very large, very powerful rocket, in fact, the most powerful ever built, even more so than the Saturn V that took us to the moon back in the 60s and 70s. So in 1972, when this last picture was taken, the idea of high definition photography has not even been considered. So I have a request of the Mars generation, and that's like, when you're coming back from the moon or Mars and you see this view, will you take a nice high definition picture for me? He said yes. Okay, I'll give you credit for it when you do that. Okay. This particular picture, when I use it, especially with students, I'll say, "What do you see here?" And they, oftentimes it'll be boats. We see boats. What's here? The picture was actually taken in 1992, shortly before my first launch on the Space Shuttle Atlantis, which you see on the launch pad in the background here. So in 1992, the United States was celebrating the 500th anniversary of Columbus having discovered the New World. And so just a few days before I was going to launch, 3 replica ships went sailing past the launch pad. So when I look at that picture, I see 500 years of transportation technology development. Because if you were going to cross the Atlantic Ocean 500 years before, you got into one of these really modern ships. That was the best they had. And it would take you at least 2 weeks to cross the Atlantic Ocean. If we fast forward 500 years, I got in this other ship, this spaceship, and I crossed the Atlantic Ocean in under 10 minutes. So it makes you wonder how people are going to be traveling 500 years from now. And I don't know the answer, what it's going to be, but I feel pretty comfortable saying it won't be the way we're doing it today. Oftentimes you get asked, how do you get to be an astronaut, or who are the astronauts? So this is my 4th crew. Let me introduce them to you to give you an idea of the kind of people that were in the office. So starting on the top left there, that's Dr. Leroy Chow. And Leroy's from the Bay Area in California. And he has an undergraduate degree and a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of California. Next to him is Navy Captain Michael Lopez Alegria, or LA as we call him. He was born in Madrid, Spain, was raised in Southern California. He's a graduate of the Naval Academy, has a master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School, and he was a Navy test pilot. In the center there is Colonel Bill MacArthur. Bill is from North Carolina. He's a graduate of West Point, has a master's degree from Georgia Tech University, and he was an Army helicopter test pilot. Second from the right there is the world's smartest man. Okay, my nominee. It's Dr. Jeff Weishoff, or Bulldog as I nicknamed him, because as the commander I decide who's going to do what tasks on the missions. And I could give him a big task or a small task, it didn't matter. He wasn't going to let go of it. So he earned the nickname of being my Bulldog. He grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He majored in physics at the University of Virginia. He has a PhD in laser physics from Stanford University. So those first four folks there in the back there, they were my spacewalkers on the mission. And our mission on this flight was an International Space Station assembly mission. So we were carrying up two pieces of the space station. We were pretty early in the building sequence, so you can see in our patch design here, it was going to be 3 modules when we arrived, and then we were adding 2 pieces to it, which are the red pieces that you see on the patch design there. So the way the mission went was we launched, I flew the rendezvous and the docking with the space station, and then my robotic arm operator on the far right here wearing the flag of Japan, that's Dr. Koichi Wakata. And Koichi used the space shuttle robotic arm to lift the pieces out of the payload bay and put them in place on the space station. And then on 4 consecutive days, my spacewalkers went out in alternating teams of 2 to hook everything up so that the pieces that we had just added would work. Koichi has an undergrad and a PhD in aeronautical engineering from the Japanese university system. My pilot on the mission was Colonel Pam Melroy. Pam's from Rochester, New York. She went to Wellesley College outside of Boston, has a master's degree from MIT, and Pam was an Air Force pilot, an Air Force test pilot, and an Air Force combat pilot. Pretty amazing lady. She was also my only rookie on the crew. So we trained together as a team for 2.5 years getting ready for this mission. And in 2.5 years, when you spend that much time together, you get to know people really well. The good news is we liked each other. But we would do things not only at work, but outside of work with our families. We'd go out to dinner, we'd go to the movies together. We had the same sense of humor. So while this is the official crew photo for the STS-92 mission for NASA, this is more what we were really like. In fact, we picked up the nickname of being the evil crew. But after 2.5 years of training, it was time to go to work. So here we are down at the crew quarters, the quarantine facility down at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So we go into quarantine 7 days before launch. So NASA's been doing quarantine since way before it became cool. But we do it for the same reason, so that our children don't bring germs home and share them with us right before we're trying to launch. So on launch morning, you would wake up, get cleaned up, come on out to this common area. They'd have photographers come through and take photos like this, and then they'd have breakfast for us, and weather briefings, tell us what we could expect at launch and at all of our emergency landing sites. And then it's a short walk down the hallway to get in our launch and entry suits, the pressure suits that we wear during the dynamic phases. Here you can see I've got my visor down unlocked, gloves are on, so we're doing a leak check on the suit to make sure it would hold the integrity that it needed to, and making sure the communications gear was going to work properly. Because if you're going to have any issues or any problems, you want to solve them before you get out on the launch pad. It's hard to fix things out there. About 3.5 hours before launch, we head out to the pad. It's about a 15-minute ride from the crew quarters out to the pad. Now, if you look at the faces of the crew members here, you don't see that anyone is worried or concerned. It's all smiles. A couple reasons for that. One is that, we knew that if anything was going to go wrong that we could do anything about, we were prepared for it. We had trained for it. The other reason is that in the space shuttle program, any one of a million things would stop you from launching. It could be a hardware problem, a software problem, low clouds, high winds, threat of lightning. I've gone to bed 10 evenings in my lifetime expecting to launch the next day, and it only happened 4 times. So the reason that you don't see any concern on anybody's faces there is because we really didn't think we were going anywhere. But we did. So the challenge to get anything into orbit is you have to get it going really, really fast. And this vehicle, that whole stack on the launch pad is about the size of a 15-story building. It weighs 5 million pounds, and we have to accelerate it to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. It's pretty fast. So the way we do that, the bulk of the thrust for the first 2 minutes comes from these solid rocket boosters. They produce about 6 million pounds of thrust between the two of them, and they have enough propellant in them to get us to a point where we're about 25 miles high, about 25 miles downrange, going about 4 times the speed of sound. So at that point, we're already faster than a rifle bullet, but we're just getting started. So the engines on the back of the orbiter itself, the 3 liquid engines, they're being fed liquid oxygen from the pointy end of the tank, liquid hydrogen from the barrel section. Those engines would start 7 seconds before launch. That gave them time to come up to full thrust. And then the onboard computers would actually check the engines, making sure they were operating properly. And if they were, the space shuttle used to launch itself. The onboard computers would send the commands that would simultaneously light the boosters and blow the 8 explosive bolts that are holding us on the launch pad. A couple of other small engines here that we're not using during the ascent phase. They're designed just to be used in the weightless environment. So I used those once we got into orbit to change my altitude during a rendezvous and docking with the station. And we also used those to come home, to slow down and do the deorbit burn. Once we get to the velocity that we need to be able to stay in orbit, the computers shut the engines down and we separate from the tank. Now that tank was the only part of the entire system that was not reusable. So it would actually fly all the way around the world and re-enter the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean and would burn up during entry. Here's the station as we found it. It looks a lot like our patch design, only it's upside down. I don't know if the patch was right or this was right. But the center and lower modules here were built by the Russians. The top is a US built, we call it the Node, and it's like the hub of a Tinker toy set. So it has an attachment point on the bottom and on the top, and then every 90 degrees around the side. So we actually put the station together one module at a time like a huge Tinker toy. I mentioned the 4 spacewalks that the guys did. We'll have a chance to see them in action a little bit in the video. One thing we never tired of was looking out the window at this beautiful planet that we all share. Because the colors are stunning when you're looking down at Earth. And the other thing that's kind of unique about it is that you'll never see the same thing twice. Because even if you're going to come back over the same part of the world, the following day something will be different. The lighting will be different. The clouds pattern will be different. So you're always seeing something new. We're actually in this picture here. This is Galveston Bay. Here after a pretty good rainstorm, you can see how muddy the water is. The interstate's going down from Houston on the right down to Galveston Island over here. So Clear Lake is right around this area, so we're in this picture, so smile. if you could look over your shoulder during launch, you could see the peninsula of Florida laying on its side. Here with that, in the sun glints down here, you can see the Florida Keys going down to Key West, the island of Cuba, right over here, the Bahamas just off the coast. So I used to know, I would know what part of the world we were going to see in daylight in each of my missions, and so I would study the history and the geography of what I was going to be seeing, so that it would mean something to me when I understand the significance of it. We're over in the Eastern Mediterranean here. This is a kind of a neat picture. We were up pretty high when we took it. I'll start at the top here, at the edge of the world there. That light blue, that's the Black Sea. The mountainous area here is the country of Turkey, the island of Cyprus. Looks like a huge horseshoe crab. And now here we are down at the bottom, we're over northern Egypt. And this is the Nile River Delta, the dark green that you see there. So this area right here is where the My Pillow guy gets all his cotton for his pillows. Down at the bottom, you can actually see the Nile River snaking through this great dull grayish area. The gray area is the city of Cairo. And in the daytime, cities look kind of boring and dull because when you're looking down, you're seeing a lot of asphalt. You're looking at parking lots and rooftops and things, so not spectacular at all. But at nighttime, they're brilliant. They're beautiful to see. Just to the west of Cairo, there's some white dots that are right there, and that's where the Sphinx and some of the pyramids are in Egypt. And the reason there are white dots is because for hundreds of years the tourists have been going to look at them, and they walk around kicking up the topsoil, and the wind blows it away, and underneath there's a white limestone rock bed. So you're seeing the white dots there. Just off to the east is the Suez Canal, which is the shortcut from the Indian Ocean up to the Mediterranean so that you don't have to go all the way around Africa. And then further to the east, right there's a straight line. And that's actually a border, that's a fence actually, with Egypt on the left and Israel on the right. And the color difference is because the Israelis are irrigating and growing crops on their side, and the Egyptians are not on theirs. See a lot of Mother Nature from space. We're in a pretty good position to view it. So here's a well-defined storm, either a typhoon or a hurricane. And you might get lucky during your mission and have a volcano erupting, which can be quite spectacular. This particular one was in eastern Russia, and pretty easy to tell which direction the wind was blowing. When it was time for us to come home, and usually we could get about 14 days, roughly 2 weeks out of a mission. We were limited by the amount of oxygen we had on board. And so when it was time to come home, we would turn around and slow down using those two small engines that I pointed out earlier on the back of the orbiter to do the deorbit burn. So when we're in orbit, we talk about our velocities not in miles per hour, but in feet per second. So we're going about 26,000 feet per second. To come home, we slow down only about 400 out of 26,000. But that's enough to take us out of this nice circular orbit that we're in and start us on just a very gradual 1 degree, 1.25 degree descent towards the top of the atmosphere. So we start up here at about 250 miles where we're in orbit, and the top of the atmosphere is down here at about 63 miles. So for the first 30 minutes or so while you're descending towards the top of the atmosphere, you're still going very fast, and you're still weightless. But eventually you start hitting the upper atmosphere, and the orbiter, being as blunt as it is coming in, produces a bow wave in front of it. And that bow wave, as we enter the atmosphere, gets hotter and hotter and hotter. In fact, it gets as hot as 3,000 degrees outside. the scientists, so when we start hitting the atoms and molecules of the upper atmosphere, we actually start knocking electrons off the atoms. So we create all this charged gas that the scientists call plasma. And when I saw it for the first time, I looked out, I floated up in my straps, and I could see the top of the nose cap of the orbiter, and it's made of a black carbon material. And it was glowing carnation pink during the injury. My eyes got about this big when I looked at it, and then I noticed that there were some burning embers going past my window. And I had a couple of thoughts to that. My first was, wow, the simulator doesn't do this. and then my second thought was, and I hope that's not important. So here's what it looks like from inside. If you look out the window, you can see it was white hot at the time. We were surrounded by that plasma. So when I saw that, I thought, I'm just a pilot, I'm not a scientist. But I know what that is. I've seen that before. That's called fire. We're surrounded by fire as we're coming in. You really want those tiles to be doing their job protecting the vehicle. On my first 3 missions, I landed in Florida, and they wanted us to land this one in Florida as well. However, the weather wasn't cooperating, and so they actually gave us a couple of bonus days in space with hoping the weather would improve in Florida, but it never did. So on the 3rd extra day, they said, well, we're bringing you home because we were running out of food and running out of propellant. So they said, we're going to bring you into Edwards Air Force Base. No big deal. I've lived there for a year going to test pilot school. Our daughter had been born there. We'd done a little bit of training there, but not too much. But to tell you the truth, when I rolled out on final to land the space shuttle, I didn't really care what state I was in, as long as I had a nice big runway in front of me. So we have a short video of this movie, or of this mission rather, and you'll see some familiar faces in it. The first thing I do as a commander when we're named as a crew is start working on our patch design. So I give the job to the rookies to do that. I say, just spell my name right and make it so that it's a cool shirt logo. So here we are on our what they said is our actual launch walkout. We tried it a number of times before we actually got off the ground. In fact, it took us so long to launch that my mother left. Here's what it's like climbing up in your seat with the vehicle in the vertical. Here's Pam getting in next to me. 4 of us were upstairs, the other 3 were downstairs. Now the downstairs folks don't have a window or a display, so they're just listening. So if you are upstairs, there's some things you can't say. You can't say, uh-oh, or what was that? Because they'll kill you later. There's main engine start, and you can hear the roar, of course, and then the booster's light right there. So we're on our way. Noise level goes up, vibration, acceleration, it all starts coming together. We climb vertically for 8 seconds, just straight up, and that's just to avoid hitting any of the structure. Then the computers commanded us to roll to get into the same orbit that the ISS was in the International Space Station. So you can think of something in space as going around, when it's in orbit, it's going around like in a hula hoop. And the Earth's rotating underneath it. So we had to wait for the Earth to rotate the launch pad underneath the hula hoop, and we launched into the same hula hoop. There was a very special moment during the ascent. Right here, I reached over and I congratulated Pam. I shook her hand. If you remember, she was my only rookie on the crew. We were just passing 50 miles of altitude. So by definition, Pam Melroy had just become the planet's newest astronaut. That was her childhood dream. So once we got in orbit, engines were shut down. We opened the payload bay doors. to expose the pieces that we brought. You can see the arm, the robotic arm on the sill there. It took us 2 days to catch the space station, so while we launched into the exact same hula hoop that it was in the same orbit, it was thousands of miles ahead of us, so it took us a couple of days to catch up. Eventually we did on flight day 3, and here we are coasting to a point above the space station, and so I flew formation with it for about an hour at 170 feet before starting in to dock with it. We were the last crew to go to the space station when there's nobody on board, so there's no one there to throw switches on the Russian hardware. So we wanted to time the docking to occur as we were sailing over a Russian ground site so that they could send commands to their hardware to turn things on and off. Here, if you notice, I'm not looking at the station, I'm looking at a monitor that has this target on it. And my job is to keep that target centered while we're closing in at a rate of about 1 inch per second. And by doing that, the two pieces would come together. So for me, it was like a real-life video game. We had a couple seconds to high-five each other, and then it was back to work. Here, Bill's operating the hardware that's going to pull the two vehicles together and latch them. And by doing that, we've created a tunnel that goes from our side of the space shuttle through the docking system up to the hatch at the International Space Station. So we pressurized that tunnel with air from the space shuttle. That allowed us to open the hatch, and now here we are up at the International Space Station on the outside. So we looked in, and sure enough, nobody was home. I would have been quite surprised had someone been there. Here, LA's opening the hatch, and he starts to float in, and then he backs out, and he goes, "No, Brian, you're the commander, you go in first." I thought, wow, what a nice guy. It was only later I learned that he was using me as the canary in the coal mine. So the first permanent crew was going to launch the week after we were going to land. And so that crew was going to be on board for 6 months. And so the flight surgeons wanted to know what gases are in the atmosphere inside the space station. So the first thing we did was to take an air sample. So that's not a hand grenade. That's the air sample bottle. They floated it to me on the far side of the node there. So we brought the sample back, and that way they could analyze the gases. Here's a little cartoon of some of the robotic arm work that Koichi had to do. This is our primary payload. It's called the Z1 Truss. It's about a 15-foot cube, weighed about 20,000 pounds. And you can think of it as being the brain of the International Space Station because it has all the critical systems on it. So pretty important that we be successful. While we were training, they said, "We know you're going to be busy, but would you mind making a movie?" So they taught us how to be movie producers. So that was an IMAX 3D camera that I had shooting a scene that's in one of the IMAX space movies. Here Pam is in that black bag. We had 2 rolls of film to shoot, but only 1 bag.